Welcome to The Explainer. We get this question all the time. How on earth do you classify political parties in different countries? Is the left in one place really the same as the left somewhere totally different? So let's jump right into the big challenge here. We love using these simple labels, left, right, center, but what happens when you try to apply that same yardstick to wildly different political systems? Like, say, comparing the United States to a country like Thailand. Yeah, it gets messy, and it gets messy fast.
So to get our heads around all this, we're going to break it down into 5 parts. First, we'll set up our basic toolkit. Then we'll use it to look at the US and Thailand. After that, we'll put them side by side to see what we find. And we'll wrap it all up with why any of this actually matters.
Okay, let's dive in. Before we start pinning parties on a map, we kind of have to agree on what the map even looks like, right? So let's lay out the basic framework we're going to be using for this whole explainer.
So our first big landmark on this political map is the left. Generally speaking, you can think of this side as focusing on the well-being of the whole community. It's all about ideas like social equality, moving society forward, and using government services to create a strong safety net for everybody.
And on the other side of the map, we have the right. This camp tends to put a much bigger emphasis on things like personal responsibility and individual freedom. It often favors tradition, wants less government getting involved in things, and really believes in the power of the free market to make society prosper.
Now, here's the key thing. These two big ideas don't just exist as separate bubbles. They form a spectrum, basically a line that runs from the far left, through the middle, all the way to the far right. And this simple line is the basic tool we're going to use to see where different political parties might fall.
All right, so let's put this tool to the test. We're going to start with a political scene that's probably pretty familiar to a lot of you, the United States and its famous two-party system.
In the US, the whole game is pretty much dominated by 2 heavyweights. You've got the Democratic Party. With its focus on things like government social programs and progressive values, it's generally placed just to the left of the middle, so center-left. Then you have the Republican Party, which puts a big emphasis on lower taxes, less government spending, and more traditional values. It sits pretty firmly on the center-right.
Okay, time to switch gears completely. Let's take that same framework and see what happens when we apply it to a totally different environment. Things get a lot more interesting when we look at a multi-party system, like the one in Thailand. See, in Thailand, the political stage is way more crowded. You've got a lot of different players. For example, a party like the People Party lines up with progressive, social democratic ideas, which puts it on the center-left. But then you have the Democrat Party, one of the oldest in the country, which leans center-right, mixing conservative social views with a strong belief in economic freedom. And the really crucial thing to get is these are just 2 of the main parties. There are others all over the place on the spectrum.
So now for the fun part. What actually happens when we put these 2 very different systems on the same map? What can we learn when we look at them side by side like this?
Well, the first thing that just jumps right out at you is the structure. The US system is basically a giant tug-of-war between 2 big teams. But in Thailand, power is spread out all over the place. To actually govern, you almost always have to build a coalition, meaning multiple parties have to team up.
So if you were to draw the American spectrum, it would look pretty sparse, right? It's defined by these 2 huge points of gravity, the Democrats on the center-left and the Republicans on the center-right. Pretty much all the political debate gets pulled into the orbit of one of those 2 poles.
And wow, what a contrast. The Thai spectrum is just packed. It's filled with all these different parties, clustered around different points. It immediately shows you that a simple left versus right label is way more complicated here, and honestly, a lot less useful on its own.
So after all that mapping and comparing, what's the big idea? What's the real takeaway from putting these 2 political systems under the microscope?
Well, this whole exercise shows us a few really critical things. First, that left-right spectrum, it's a useful starting point for sure, but it is just a model. It's not perfect. Second, the labels themselves are relative. Being center-right in the US might be all about tax cuts, but in Thailand, it might be more about protecting traditional institutions. A country's own unique history and culture are what give these labels their real meaning. It really brings to mind that old saying, a map is not the territory. And that's exactly what's happening here. Our political spectrum is a handy map that helps us get our bearings, but it can never, ever capture the full, complex, and messy reality of a nation's political life. And that kind of leaves us with one final thought to chew on. If a simple line on a chart can't even begin to define a whole country's politics, what does that say about the simple labels we're so quick to slap on ourselves and on each other? Maybe the real point is to use these tools not to find easy answers, but to start asking better questions.